the background to and start the show. I mean, you don't need any introduction.
You want me just to start?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So let me share my screen. I start with my bio here just real quick in case people don't know who I am, because I'm here in the West, and I feel honored to be there, coming to everyone in India, Mother India. I'm here in San Diego, and I've been doing Vedic astrology for about 20 years. And as you see, I'm the author of 2 books, Yoga and Vedic Astrology, and also The Ascendant, 108 Planets of Vedic Astrology. Sri Ravi Shankar published my book, Yoga and Vedic Astrology, through the Art of Living. So those who want to get my book in India, it's actually distributed through the Art of Living store, the Yoga and Vedic Astrology book. He, Gurudev published it because they really liked how it's called Yoga and Vedic Astrology. So it's very pure look at Vedic astrology, first from the yogic Sankhya philosophy perspective, and then explaining all of the astrological indicators through like the gunas and the elements and karma and dharma and 4 purusharthas and all of those things. So I've been doing meditation since I was in my early 20s. So that's 30 years ago. So anyway, I also taught Astroved certification course many years ago, 2010, of Dattatreya Shiva Baba, who was also known as Dr. Pillai. The first certification program that they did, for the same reason, because the teachings, they really thought they were very pure, but also modernized. So anyway, I do have a school called the American Academy of Vedic Art and Science that started in 2011 after my guru, Sri Mata Amritananda Mai of Kerala, India, Amma, also the Hugging Saint, gave me her blessings to start my school. And so I've been teaching level certifications 1 through 3 since 2010. And you can see my website there, VedicAstrologyCenter.net. So just like to give a quick introduction. And today I'm going to be talking about the USA Scorpio chart. I'm going to be doing a case study that that it was recently published in the Astrological magazine of Babu Bangalore, which is continuing the work of B.V. Raman. And it's based on the correct USA nativity, the chart in hand when the USA was discovered. And so for years, there's been, especially in the West, I don't really know about in India. In fact, Sunil John last week was talking about other charts that other astrologers had used. Here in the West, we've been using a chart of 6:30 p.m. And I'm going to just talk about the original chart and do this case study. I did want to also just let people know that if you wanted to download the full PDF, because I don't have time to go over all of the case studies, all of the dashas and everything, you can go to this website I set up there. It's actually usascorpiochart.com. If you click that, you go to a page that looks like this, just so you can download the full PDF. And that's the actual article that I submitted to the guys at Astrological magazine. Then they edited it and stuff, but you can just download that. And it's actually this article here, but it's a little more elaborate there. So anyway, I abbreviated some of this for this presentation, but I also have some great case studies and some comparisons to really show how when you go back and you start with the original Sibley chart, who was he was an astrologer in England at the time, and then you modify it a little bit and you keep the Scorpio ascendant, it really makes a lot more sense for the USA chart, more so than the one that's being used now, which is like 6:30 p.m., which pushes it into Sagittarius. So I'm just going to read from the article here. By the way, I also want to just say it's kind of hard to do this case study without mentioning a couple of astrologers. And actually, I know these astrologers quite well, and they're great astrologers. They do great work. This case study is not to disparage their work or anything like that. I'd love to see their case study and their elaborate, response if they wanted to. It's not a challenge, but just, this is what I'm this is what I'm putting out there. And so there's no disrespect to anyone that I'm mentioning here, but I think it's time to really re-examine these things. And so, as I say, here in the West, currently the most widely used chart of the USA is based on a time arrived at by the Western Vedic astrologer James Kelleher. And this time's almost an hour and a half ahead of the most widely publicized and generally accepted time of the USA chart, that of Ebenezer Sibley, a British astrologer of the colonial era. He published the time of 5:10 p.m. in 1780, a mere 4 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed. These are actual illustrations from the journal that he published it in. This was, it was a professional journal. It was the chart in hand of the astrologer of the day. This is the way he wrote the chart. It says America Independence, 4th of July, 10 p.m. It says 10 p.m., which that was England time. And again, so this is, and it's all these tropical positions as well, because he was a Western tropical astrologer. And by the way, this is an established chart. Western astrology uses it. It's pretty much established. The only place I see it not being established, frankly, is in the Vedic astrology, where the Vedic astrology world, at least in the West, where this other time is being used. So I just mentioned here as well, among others, Vedic astrologer and blogger Juliana Swanson often quotes this chart in her writings, and she calls it the USA Kelleher chart. And it's 6:30 p.m. So again, this is being mentioned. This is kind of ubiquitous, where this is just considered to be the chart of the US. So again, this pushes the time forward close to 1.5 hours past the Sibley chart, and most notably changes the ascendant from Scorpio to Sagittarius. So the published Sibley chart cast for 5:10 p.m. in 1780 is a great place to start to, rectify and look at the nativity. And so again, you'll see the exact time. But I want to be clear, this is an authoritative source, as frankly, the most trusted birth time, especially of an event, is when you have an astrologer of the era who was there to witness it and who recorded the event at the time. This is called the chart in hand of an astrologer, which is basically like a birth certificate in hand. Again, you have to understand, just like I published this book I published this article in the Astrological magazine, right? Before I published the article, I spent a lot of time researching this and put my professional reputation on the line. And this is the same thing Ebenezer Sibley did. This is a professional journal that he published this in. And this isn't something to just sort of cast aside or not take seriously. Again, if any of you ever look at, there's a website called Astro Databank, and there's a thing called the Rodin rating, which gives the integrity or the veracity of birth times, especially when you have events. The most reputable event chart is when you have the chart of an astrologer who recorded it at the time, not a rectification hundreds of years later or whatever. But he was there at the time. He published this in the journal 4 years later, and it's never been contradicted by any extemporaneous accounts. Every account of that day said that it was signed late in the afternoon, and it totally, so there's nothing that's ever contradicted this time, and there's no reason to really think that an astrologer of the day would go and publish this in a journal and not know what he was talking about, because he could easily be contradicted and look like a fool and ruin his reputation. The other thing to say about this is, again, we're now in 2023, and we're used to seeing astrology as having gone through this really dark period, which it really did, particularly in the West, where astrology was not really respected for hundreds of years. But back in this time, 1780, especially in England, astrology was still a very respected and venerated profession. There were professional journals. They were considered to be, professional people. They were actually what are called Freemasons. But especially in England, astrology had gone through a very palpable renaissance with an astrologer named William Lilly, who really kind of re-established astrology in the Western world, in fact, and particularly in England. It's very much akin to B.V. Raman, and how B.V. Raman really kind of breathed new life into Indian astrology in the mid-20th century, particularly for Western audiences, because B.V. Raman translated a lot of the text into English and whatnot. But it was a similar kind of thing in England at that time. So the reason I'm saying this is because there's no reason to think that an astrologer of the day, we have to not think, well, that was 1780. What did they know? Hey, they practiced it professionally. They were professionals, just like we're professionals. Their professional reputation was on the line. This was published in a journal. So this is incredibly authoritative. And unless we have a good reason to move it really far, it's a great place to start. So this is what I said in this paragraph here. And again, the reason I say this is because there's also, the burden of proof. And I'm just putting it out there like this because when I presented this alternative time to this Kelleher USA chart before, many colleagues and other students or whatever, because they've heard that time their whole life, act as though it's up to me to kind of disprove it. And again, because they've heard it for so long. But again, please listen. I'm mostly following the chart in hand of an astrologer of the day that's never been contradicted by the events. It's the chart that's used in Western astrology. And it's not up to me to disprove another time that was moved much later in the day. And again, the people who are practicing using that chart, it's up to them. They're free to come and make their case as well. But there's nothing controversial that I'm doing, even with the case study. I'm taking the chart in hand of the professional astrologer of the day, but then I'm moving it a little bit because we have all the power of Vedic astrology to really tweak it. And especially with the first dasha cycle, and you'll see how it changed as I go forward. But the first thing to understand is that in this astrologer's opinion, and as I'm going to show you, the USA is very clearly a Scorpio country, not a Sagittarius country. That's the biggest shift that happens when you stay with the Sibley chart and then you move it a little bit to accommodate the first dasha and the nakshatra that also shifts. But a few major shifts that occur when Sagittarius becomes Scorpio. So Scorpio is a sign based on suspicion, domination, power grabs, being ruled by Mars. Again, it's also about transformation and all kinds of other things. But Sagittarius is definitely much more of a religious, kind of theocratic state. Although some modern politicians want to act like the U.S. was founded on God and country and all, that is simply not true. The separation of church and state is an inviolable principle. There was enormous suspicion of kings and government itself as a core motivating factor of the founding fathers. They were very suspicious of power. This aligns much more with Sagittarius, where in Sagittarius we want to be led by a powerful figure. We want a king. We want that kind of, again, Sagittarius is about, the sort of belief in a powerful figure. Scorpio is suspicion of those things. And until very recently, sort of cult-like fealty to one leader, we see quite a bit of that now in America, but it was seen as just revolting and against all principles of America to be in this kind of sort of cult-like worship to one politician. We haven't really seen that before. So a major shift also occurs when the energy moves from the 7th house to the 8th house. And I'll show the chart in a minute. The stellium of planets in Gemini moves from the 7th house to the 8th house, and the Rahu Mercury moves from the 8th house to the 9th house. So Mercury also becomes the 8th and 11th house ruler. I'll actually go over this a little bit, but the bottom line is that this 8th house focus, when the chart becomes Scorpio, also shows how much emphasis the U.S. places on the military, dominating other countries, the insane military budget as a major source of money as well. America has been very much a militaristic country. And again, this is the placement of the planets. This is when it's a Scorpio chart, you have the ascendant here, and then you have all these planets go to Gemini in the 8th house. Now, again, the 8th house is a house of transformation, change. You see all of that, but it's also of war, of oppression. America was built on slavery and stealing the land from the natives and all of this other stuff that's very, very dark. It's not based on God and country and even taking care of the people so much. There's a lot of darkness, even in the founding, doctrine, because again, and it was founded on a war. It was a revolutionary war, but then we also fought more wars with the natives, with the Native Americans that were here, and we had brought people over in boats from Africa and enslaved them for a couple hundred years. So this is big Scorpio 8th house kind of dark energy that, again, when you have it Sagittarius, so much shifts because now you have all these massive Raja Yogas in the 7th house, which would show how much the country takes care of the people and a whole bunch of different, again, 7th and 9th Lord, 1st and 4th Lord with Raja Yoga, with the 9th Lord, and all kinds of other massive Raja Yogas in the 7th house, which that's really not the story of America. We have to also look throughout history, even though America now is like a superpower or whatever, it wasn't that. That didn't really happen until after like World War II. And, it's only been about 50, 60 years that America has been this like, oh, they're the dominant superpower and whatnot. For most of the time, we were fledgling in a lot of ways, civil war. And it's not this kind of success story, which you would see here with all of this power, Sagittarius, all these Raj Yogas up here, that would not show this kind of sort of fledgling history, particularly with the domination of the natives and slavery and all of those things that the country was founded on. So the other thing that really happens is Saturn aspects the ascendant to the exact degree. Now, again, that's not present in the Sagittarius chart, where, again, you would have Saturn. And in fact, with the Scorpio chart, Saturn does still aspect all of these planets, but he also mainly aspects the ascendant in very close degree. So again, Saturn aspecting the ascendant shows a lot of control, again, over the land, over the people. And again, particularly when you look at the beginning of the country, again, you have to remember that even in America, even up until 1964, blacks didn't have the right to vote in America. That wasn't that long ago. It's almost 200 years where there was so much oppression and, again, racism and these kinds of things. So again, Saturn aspecting the ascendant in Scorpio. Scorpio is a sign of domination, control. So that really shows a picture that's very different than if it was Sagittarius and we're, theocratic and we're religious and we're taking care of people, and that's simply not as accurate of a story, at least not in my mind. So again, these themes, the Saturn energy is also the idea of work itself to death. Saturn is about work, and Americans, we work more than anyone. We don't get vacations. It's like work. No, and make all this money and this kind of thing. So Saturn is aspecting all those planets in Gemini in the 8th, aspecting the ascendant. Also, the U.S. is much more conservative and prudish than other liberal democracies, especially in Europe. We had the Puritans come. We also have a very strong religious right that's always been here in America. And again, we shouldn't mistake the religious right and the control structure that the religious right has been for something like inspiration and purpose, which would be like a theocratic state or a Sagittarius nature. So again, Saturn aspecting Scorpio shows a very conservative sort of control structure and wanting to control through the conservatism. So again, Sagittarius ascendant loads up the 7th house with massive Raja Yogas, all 3 Dharma lords joined, and in the angular 7th house. Again, although we'd like to think that we've always been the most powerful and blessed and wealthiest and virtuous towards its citizens, it's simply not true. We were an average country fledgling for close to 200 years until after World War II. We were rife with civil war, slavery, robber barons, hyper-corporatism, militarism, consumerism. These things are still there, and it really sort of pushed the world to the brink. The world has been trying to keep up with American consumerism now for decades. Again, this Saturn aspecting the ascendant. So again, the other thing, U.S. doesn't take care of its citizens, each other. We lack basic services that all other countries have, like, again, free access to college, healthcare, high-speed rail, affordable housing. There's so many things in the modern world. Again, I don't want this to be so political, but these are just, people see how Americans live, especially like without healthcare and other kinds of things that other modern democracies, especially European democracies and affluent democracies have. And it's like, man, again, that's just very sort of Spartan existence in a lot of ways. And by the way, there's ample money to take care of the people, but particularly militarism, corporate greed, domination of the natives, Africans, and the citizens themselves has been the sad history so far. And these attributes are much more reminiscent of having these yogas in the 8th house, not in the 7th house of the people, because the 7th house of a country chart is the people. It's the people of the country. The 8th house is like dominating the people. And so this is, again, I think a much more accurate reading. And again, if you had all these Raja Yogas in the 7th house, I think at least we'd all have access to basic health care. We wouldn't spend so much money on the military. And by the way, just to jump down, because I want this to be people to understand this world military budgets. If you've never seen this before, this is what the United States spends on the military relative to all the other countries in the world. You could stack, we spend more than the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It used to be 8 countries combined. Maybe it's 7 now. The U.S. spends, and it's at the expense of all the things I just said. We could have healthcare, we could have access to education and all these other things, but instead, it's something like 7 out of every 10 discretionary dollar is spent on the military. Now, again, this is Scorpio, not Sagittarius. You simply cannot jump and see that type of imbalance with the Sagittarius, which would be much more concerned with taking care of the citizens, with these kinds of things. At least that's my view. Again, people are free to not think that, but this is definitely the way I see it. And you can also see, here's a discretionary spending. This was of 2015. It's only gotten worse. The military budget last year that was approved was $800 billion. $800 billion. Yet they couldn't pass $100 billion for things to help the people. This is just a matter of record. $800 billion for the military. Again, they could have taken $200 billion out and given $300 billion to the people, and it would have improved everyone's lives. But no, they have to suck every dime. So again, this is very much this. It's very much this kind of chart. This Scorpio ascendant, these planets in the 8th house. Again, 8th house is war, domination, control, and Saturn not just aspecting the planets in the 8th house, but aspecting the planets aspecting the ascendant. And I will tell you, living in America is pressure. It's like you feel the pressure. You feel the pressure, baby. Don't get sick because you won't be able to pay for it. And who knows what might happen. So these kinds of things are, and by the way, as you see, I have some case studies here, especially about when the Mahadashas reset and things like that. So if we look at, so this is just a comparison, a quick comparison between the Sagittarius and the Scorpio quality of life and that nature, where one is, again, you all know what Sagittarius means. I'm talking to people that understand. You understand what Sagittarius would be. Sagittarius is religion, it's belief, it's hope, it's purpose. And again, we're talking about a country, and we're talking about a country that overthrew a king, and then we could have had a king. We could have had a king, we could have had a theocratic state, we could have had a religious state, we could have done anything. But again, I'll just tell you, if you're not sure of it, the founding fathers were not religious. They were absolutely against setting up any type of theocratic state. And the freedom to worship any religion is built into it, and that there won't be any state religion or anything like that. They were called Freemasons. If you don't know who Freemasons were, they were kind of like alchemists of Europe. And that means Ben Franklin and Jefferson and Washington, all of them were of this idea that you wanted to keep the church out of the government. The separation of church and state is a fundamental principle. And again, this is, and there was suspicion. They were absolutely suspicious. That's why the whole government is set up to have these systems of checks and balances. What do you think checks and balances are? It's like, I'm going to be able to check you because I don't trust you. So they have 3 systems of government to check on the others. Constant checks and balances, because they were suspicious of any one branch or any one person getting too much power, because they just rebelled against a king. So they were like, no kings, no centralized authority, and even suspicious of a centralized government. That's why you have all this state government. So again, this is the founding nature. And by the way, they were also even suspicious of the people they brought over and enslaved. And, not to mention they were, the idea of oppressing them is one thing, but a lot of that was also built on the suspicion. They didn't want to embrace the natives because they were afraid the natives would overtake them. So they had to control and dominate them. Same way with the black slaves. In fact, the first police forces were to keep slaves in check. So again, just look at this structure and see how this is so much more seen in the Scorpio identity and idea. By the way, I just have to say this as well. If you're a Scorpio person, I'm not saying you're this type of person or whatever. We're not talking about people. We're talking about a kind of ideology. The other thing I will say, though, is that, again, there's also the power. We have to also understand that America was a revolution. We were revolutionary, and the establishment of America sent shockwaves through Europe. All the monarchies in Europe were like, oh my God, we can't maintain these monarchies anymore, because when we rebelled against England, the French Revolution hadn't happened yet. All of the countries in Europe were still ruled by kings, Kaiser, in Germany, and Russian czars, and all of this. And so America was revolutionary in this regard. And again, that's Scorpio. Came in and blew up the system like the rebellious child who gets in there and in one ways throws off the shackles of tyranny of England, but then in their own way creates their own oppressive structure by bringing people over, enslaving them and oppressing them and taking their land. So it's a mixed and ironic story. But again, you can see all of that with the ruling planet in the 8th house. Again, Scorpio is ruled by Mars. The ruling planet is in the 8th house. Jupiter, the 2nd and 5th house ruler, is in the 8th house. Venus, the 7th and 12th house ruler, is in the 8th house. And the Sun, the 10th house ruler, is in the 8th house as well. All of those things are, again, you can see that it's this spirit of revolution. Again, that's very different than if it's 7th house, because again, the 7th house is an angle. Angle brings stability, structure. And again, these are now massive Raja Yogas in the 7th house. That would be the 5th Lord in the 7th. That would be Jupiter, the 1st and 4th Lord in the 7th with the 5th Lord and the 9th Lord. I mean, these are massive Raja Yogas that would just, from the beginning, just set the country off. And again, it would be a very different story, in my view. Especially, again, when you see massive yogas in angles like this, Raja Yogas in angles like this, like in a nativity chart, in a natal chart, or in an event chart, you don't see the kind of turmoil that has happened in America, which has fought civil wars, fought many other, kinds of wars with the natives and all that. It's a country that has been at war for its entire history, in that way, to take land. So this is the first thing to understand. And so now, if we look at the original Sibley time, again, as I said, he was an 18th century British astrologer and Freemason. He published the first known horoscope, and it was in a book called A Complete Illustration of the Celestial Science of Astrology using 10:10 p.m., which equals 5:10 p.m. Philadelphia. So Sibley chart, so by 1785 was variously quoted as 5, 450, 515. The date of the signature of the Declaration of Independence from the Library of Congress, the Philadelphia Historic Society, Thomas Jefferson, when an old man, said it was late afternoon when the document was signed. John Quincy Adams also claimed they signed late in the day. Manly Hall, after visiting the Library of Congress sometime in the early 1940s, said he found writings that supported between 4:30 and 6 p.m. without noting the source. So the rectified time of 5:40 p.m., again, you're saying, well, he says 5:10. Why are you saying 5:40? It's a good question. I'll get to a little more nuance here, but I'll just read this through. But as you've seen, several sources affirm that the declaration was voted on by mid-afternoon but it seems clear that the document wasn't signed until later. So after looking this over, I've concluded it's more likely that the moon nakshatra is Shatabishak, not Dhanishta, because it changes when you move it forward after 5:10. It changes at 5:33 p.m. So that would make the first dasha that of Rahu, not of Mars. So that shift from Shatabishak to Dhanishta happens at 5:33 p.m. So that's only 23 minutes past the Sibley time of 5:10. So this adjustment is typical because we can use the deep powers of Vedic astrology to ascertain the nakshatra and the dasha cycle. It's because we have great tools in Vedic astrology. So I could have left it at 5:10 and it would still have been almost perfect. And it could. And I looked at it for a while there at having Dhanishta as the first nakshatra. And a lot of it works, but it doesn't work as well. And I'm going to show you why later. Based on these criteria, though, I believe the best time for this chart is from 5:33 to 5:48 p.m. Making the moon nakshatra Shatabishak and the first dasha of Rahu. Thus, I settle on the rectified time of 5:40 p.m., but someone could tweak it even further, somewhere in this 15 minutes, because, again, this is very accurate and arrived at sensibly, because it begins with the best available source, the Sibley chart, which, again, is corroborated, and there's no reason to doubt it. He was a professional at the time, his reputation on the line, he recorded the time, and no one really debates it. It's not controverted in any way. But then I actually make an important correction to accommodate the nakshatra and the dasha cycle. But most important, it changes the ascendant back from Sagittarius to Scorpio, as is certainly the case with the USA chart. Again, I have more things to say about that, but I want to also just talk about this rectification and moving, because I'm talking about how he's got this time at 5:10, but then I move it forward. It's like, well, you're doing the same thing, Sam. You're also changing the time. But look, here's the thing. Just like with a nativity, just like when someone is born, there's all these questions, and these are nagging questions even with astrology. When do you make the chart? Do you do it when the baby's head pops out, when it takes the first breath, when the legs come out? When do you actually make the chart, right? When? So again, even in people, it's a complicated issue because we're not exactly sure when the karmas start. It's said to be the first breath, but sometimes babies are born, they don't start breathing yet, or there's all kinds of stuff. But in this type of an example, this is a very amorphous thing, okay? They voted on this declaration, then they start signing it, and then at some point it's kind of done. So we don't really know what we're really evaluating here. Was it 5:10 when they started? Was it 5:10 when they done? Was it 5:10 after they did it and they all had a beer together? Or what are we even talking about? So it's very easy, especially in a chart like this, to move that time and hone it more in harmony with the cosmic sort of, moment. Again, Sibley could have been that 5:10 is when they started signing it. Maybe by 5:33 to 5:48 they were done. Again, I'm not obsessing over that kind of thing, but it's important to understand because people might say, well, you moved it. You're saying 5:10 and now you're not using that time. But this is always what happens. And those professional astrologers that are here, Sunil John and many of the other esteemed colleagues, know that rectifications, especially even sometimes when someone has a birth certificate, you look at the chart and you know that it's not perfect. Like you have to tweak it a little bit. Some of it is because of the Ayanamsha or other kinds of things. But then you find, based on the case study, and again, this is a long case study where I have all kinds of events and stuff like that. I'm not going to have time to go over all these events, but based on this case study, the rectification then holds up. So that's why you rectify. And the first thing that holds up is the first dasha moves from Mars and from Dhanishta into Shatabishak. That was the first thing that you notice about this later time. So this is a time when, based on the Sibley chart, we can move it forward enough to where Rahu is the first dasha, which again makes a lot of sense. Continue, especially when you consider the chaotic, discombobulated nature. Again, I don't want to do a complete history lesson of America, but it's not just that we had a war, but it was also even the land itself. What was a state? What wasn't? 5 or 6 different European countries, or owned land. You had the French, the Spanish, the British. The country itself was very Rahu-like, even in those early days. And so even as long as it would take to establish a country, it makes sense that Rahu is that first nakshatra. And again, this is my research, and you're free to look at it. But again, this is why we start, or why I started with that, and then I followed the the case study after that. So I'm going to take a quick drink here. If someone wanted to ask a quick question, you could do that while I take a drink. So I'll just keep going, because I have some comparisons and some case studies. Again, if people are just joining us, you can actually go to a website I've set up where you can download this full PDF, usascorpiochart.com. You can go to download the full article. But I want to just show a couple of things, because I think it will also really illustrate that this is also very much a living rectification. A lot of it is based on things that have also happened in the last several years. Again, so I've been looking at this USA Geppi chart, and what happens, again, notice the difference. And those astrologers amongst us know that there's a huge shift when all these planets move from the 7th house to the 8th house. If you've done enough readings, man, all these Raja Yogas in the 7th house, you see someone with a natal chart like that, boy, that's very different than if you really look at the story of America and how much chaos and especially war and all of this stuff that's going on. This looks a lot more like it. Again, particularly Saturn aspecting the ascendant, that kind of sort of control, and aspecting these planets in the 8th house, not the 7th house. But I will be fair to say that the Saturn aspecting the planets in the 7th house could also say, even from the Sagittarius chart, that maybe you think that shows the oppression of the natives. Perhaps you could see it that way, but I don't see it that way, because the Sagittarius ascendant would be much more gracious, much more inspiring, much more religious, especially, and especially fanatical, because this would be much more fanatical in my view to have Jupiter, Sun, Venus, Mars joined in the 7th house of a Sagittarius chart. It would be much more of a kind of fanatical religious nature, and also much more wanting to take care of the people better. But something else that I wanted to mention here, and it's, again, we here in America and in the world, we've really dealt with the rise of Trump, obviously. And the second Mahadasha reset, which, again, if you know, then you know that the chart of the country started on Rahu Dasha, and then we had a Rahu reset 120 years later, and then we just had another Rahu reset where the Vimshotri cycle flips over again. We just had it. And when that happened, that was actually May 29th, 2016. That's when this happened. That's when we had the USA chart reset. Rahu Dasha started again. In particular, let's look at what's in the first house here. At that time, again, if you're saying this is a Scorpio country, take a look at what happened to the country, because this is a reset for the country, and look at what happened to the country. Okay, we have this date. Again, those who aren't Americans, don't live here, don't understand, but this was actually really the time when we realized that, for example, Donald Trump's his possibility of being president was real. It was now a major shift where he was already the candidate by then who was going to win the primary, and he was in many ways eclipsing the country in a lot of ways. I'm not saying for good or bad. I'm just saying his energy, and it's kind of done that since, kind of shifted everything. Like he's like an eclipse. He comes in and just eclipses all the energy and just gobbles it up like an eclipse, like a Rahu eclipse. And again, look at his chart and tell me that since that time, look at his chart and that USA Geppi chart and tell me that this doesn't look like the person that will come along when we have the Rahu reset. Look at who comes on the scene May 29th, 2016, this guy. Now, again, people focus on this Mars and Leo ascendant, which again, that's in the 10th house of the USA chart. Oops, that's in the 10th house of the USA chart. But look at the ascendant, the USA ascendant, 2756 of Scorpio. Again, it's somewhere around here. This is when the moon goes into Shatabishak, because as you can see, 10 minutes earlier, the moon would be in Dhanishta. So it goes up here, and we have Jyeshta Nakshatra. Again, Jyeshta ruled by Indra, warfare, this kind of thing. And look who becomes the dominant player since then. Look at his ascendant, Ketu. Ketu right on the ascendant, exact degree. And of course, his moon as well, exact degree, 27 degrees, 2756, 2741. So this figure comes out of nowhere. Again, Rahu, out of nowhere, and what he eclipses us all. If you've ever seen a human eclipse, that's him. And again, it eclipses the people, it eclipses the country. To also give an example, look at this. We had this insurrection that happened January 6th, 2021. Look at what was right on the ascendant of the US chart. Again, if you're looking at the Sagittarius, it's kind of okay, the sun's there. But look, Ketu right in Scorpio, right on that ascendant degree. When we had the January 6th, and make no mistake, again, I know I'm coming into India here, but this was something we've never seen before. This was an attempt to overthrow a free and fair election. There was every opportunity in the courts to litigate it and everything. We have a legal system, and you don't get to just decide that you think the legal system is wrong, so you're going to do that. I mean, 20 years, 20 years earlier in the 2000 election, when they were still counting votes in the Gore-Bush election, the Supreme Court came in and stopped it. If there was ever a time when the legal system failed, it was then. There was no failure of the legal system that led to this. 60 lawsuits lost because there was no basis for it. But this insurrection came, and you can see this Ketu on the Lagna, both of this figure and of this event. Pretty telling for a Scorpio ascendant. And again, this is like a reset. Now, again, I also want to let people know that if you have the Sagittarius ascendant, then this second Mahadasha reset of Rahu, it actually happened at the end of 2015. So rather than happening on May 29th of 2016, when I think is much more precise, because again, by this time we knew Trump was going to be the Republican, and it was like, now we're like, what are we doing? What in the world is happening? Confusion, Rahu. It was like, how in the world did this happen? If you look at it from the Sagittarius ascendant, from that 6:30 time, that second Mahadasha reset of Rahu happens at the end of 2015. It's like September of 2015. Now, that one could still say, well, that's when he started to get traction. Okay, that's fine. If you may think that, and that's fine. It's not, I can't say it's wrong, but I don't think it's this. I don't think it's this clear. We've seen this. This is like, but in September 2015, we still thought he was going to blow himself up. No one thought he was going to actually get through the primaries or anything like that. We were still waiting for him to drop out. By this time, he was a real deal, and he was eclipsing the country. And we're like, what in the world's going on? So again, if you look at these very recent shifts in the United States, look at how the USA has shifted in the world. Look at what we were before this time. Again, you're all in India. What happened in the world before this? Now, again, by the way, I'm not saying good or bad. This isn't political, like, yeah, well, before it was good, now it's bad or whatever. You can have your views about him or all of that stuff. That's really not the issue here. And it's good to try to separate that, because sometimes when I do these case studies, people get so jacked up politically that they can't learn from the case study. Regardless of what one might think, that it's better or worse, or he's good or bad or whatever, look at how the standing of the U.S. has changed since this time, and this shock of the world. And so again, you can see that is also very much Scorpio kind of energy. Scorpio to like shock the world, 8th house, like bam. And we start that, and we started that dasha cycle over again. And again, at that time, we also had Saturn and Mars in Scorpio transiting at that time. And Saturn was very close to the ascendant. He went up to about 21 degrees and then went retrograde. So these are the main points. When you get this article, again, I go through and I talk about the Vimshottari Dasha sequences and this resetting. I also, if you do want to download that, there's also a few things. When you do the chart of a country, when you do mundane astrology, this is how you look at it. First house is, again, like the identity, the actions, the path, the course that the country takes. Again, like I just did, that first house is just like someone's life. Is it a Scorpio life or a Sagittarius life? Like, you have to decide which one. Again, I see all that military budget. I see the, starting enslaving and conquering people, the conquest of the natives and the enslavement and the disruption and the battling, much more Scorpio in nature. Again, second house is like money, finances, values. Third house, innovation, tech, literature, ideas. Fourth house, homeland, feeling, patriotism. And by the way, there is a lot of patriotism, like in all charts, but America has that as well. Look, the moon is in the fourth house. People have that patriotism. They have that. Again, the moon has directional strength here. There's 1,000 things I can say. So we're going quick here because I don't have forever. This could be a 5-hour lecture. But again, the moon has directional strength there in the fourth house. So there is a great patriotism. Fifth house, education system, inspirations. Again, but look at this. Fifth house, there's no planets in the fifth house. But the fifth house ruler is in the eighth house, education system. Again, our education system is a mess in America. It has been for a long time. Sixth house, battles between citizens, problems, enemies. Again, sixth house ruler is Mars. Sorry, I'm going to pull this over here. The sixth house ruler is Mars. And he goes in the eighth house. Again, you can look at this as what's called Viparit Raj Yoga and all this. I'm sorry. But it's also, Scorpio is a fighting sign because Mars, the ruling planet, also rules the sixth house. So there's going to be a sixth house fighting nature about America. Again, is it more fighting or is it more connected to the heart and gracious, which is Sagittarius? Seventh house, relationship to each other, the government to the people and to other nations on the meta level. So this is why I said Trump come along and eclipsed the country and the people. Rahu Sun in the seventh house of the USA chart. Seventh house is the people. And he comes in, he's like, me, pay attention to me. I alone can fix it. And, again, eclipses people. Eighth house, war, destruction, rebirth. Ninth house, philosophy, religion, beliefs, sense of purpose. And this is a great thing of America. You would have this Mercury Rahu in the ninth house. Now that shows the spirit of innovation, of America. Especially now, right? And again, in the 20th century, when we became a superpower, so to speak, especially like the arts and creativity and things like that, that's the Mercury Rahu ingenuity. And I'm going to go through the last several dashas, especially of the 20th century, and just kind of show you this. But again, this ninth house, but it's a retrograde Mercury in the ninth house with Rahu. Again, ninth house is there. You can say, well, Sam, I think Sagittarius and all that religion sounds like it to me. It's not pure religion, it's religiosity. It's Rahu in the ninth, not Sagittarius ascendant with all these Raja Yogas. It's Rahu in the ninth with the retrograde eighth lord. That's what the religion is. It's the confused kind of direction that this would show. And I think that is the better way to read it. I think that's the more correct way to read it. More kind of religious fundamentalism and very emotional around those themes. Again, it's not to be insulting, but it's much more of the confusing purpose. Like, who are we? What are we? Because it's not just religion. It's also the ninth house is the philosophies and the purpose, the sense of purpose that the country has. 10th house, nation's power, the leader, the king, president, government. And again, we see here the 10th house ruler, nothing in the 10th house, but 10th lord goes to the 8th. 11th house, the collective identity, shared sense of sacrifice and duty. We have Saturn here in the 11th house. And the 11th house lord is Mercury. Again, he's retrograde here. And 12th house, secrets, confusion, lies, hidden agendas. So this is a bit complicated for this class, the predictive formula that I've been using. I just show how I arrived at all of these case studies, which you're free to look at. But again, here's a few things just of this century. And this is a sort of quick history of America, particularly the 20th century. Stock market crash. This would have been Jupiter Dasha. Stock market crash, October 29th, 1929, right before the Saturn Dasha, we had that. So this was the end of Jupiter Dasha, and the stock market, and then Saturn Dasha was right after that, which was the Great Depression through World War II. So Saturn Dasha in the 20th century was the end of the Depression through World War II. Mercury Dasha, post-World War II innovation. This is when America really became a superpower, more than anything. And that would be Mercury Dasha and the post-World War II innovations up through the late 60s. And again, Mercury Dasha, Mercury's the ruler of all these planets. Mercury's the ruler of all of these Dharma planets in the 8th and Saturn. So again, this is the principle upon which I make these predictions and make them very accurately, is what the planets rule. By the way, Mercury also rules Jeshta, the ascendant. So this is really when America became the America that we look at now, post-World War II innovation. And then through the late 60s, Ketu, the 60s revolution. See, Ketu's here in the 3rd house. It's not ruling anything, but Ketu shows that kind of focus. And in many ways, Ketu is also very connected to the heart because he's like Rahu without the head. So that Ketu and the late 60s revolution was really where here in America we took a magnifying glass to all of the stuff that we had been doing since post-World War II. Then Venus, we have the me generation. This is those of us who lived through it, or maybe this was like the mid-70s through like the Reagan-Bush era. Again, this was the 80s and commerce and a lot of yuppies and commercialism here in America. The sun cycle was Clinton era and a lot of corporatization. Was in the Clinton era and the Sun Dasha. Moon was mainly the Bush era. George Bush, by the way, Bush had a Cancer ascendant. The Mars was like the Obama era, and again, Obama had a very prominent Mars as well. And then we have this Rahu just started, and this was like the rise of Trump to like the present day. So these are a few things. I also wanted to make sure to thank my student, Casey Scott at Gold Star Astrology, for helping do the research and particularly hunting down a lot of these extemporaneous events, including like these great illustrations. Again, you have to understand this man Sibley, this was, look at this beautiful artwork. They went to a lot of, headache back then. He had this chart and it was published. This was a full-on journal with all of this artwork and whatnot. So it's a very professional thing, just like you see in magazines and in publications now. So these are direct from the publication that was published back in 1780. And so my student Casey Scott did great work to help me with that. So again, if you wanted to download the full PDF, again there at that website, you can look at all of these case studies where I go through moon landing, JFK assassination, 9/11 terror attack, moon Rahu. So again, there's a lot of these things. I'll finish up with a few patterns. Again, you notice the 8th house themes as I discussed, war, assassinations. Notice how there were 3 presidential assassinations. Jupiter and Saturn were the Bhukti lords. Jupiter is in the 8th house, ruling the sun in the 8th house. So this is me giving a synopsis of the case studies. Sun and Jupiter are leaders. Saturn rules the Rahu Mercury, 8th lord. Venus also shows up in the war efforts a lot. She's in the 8th house, ruled by Rahu, Ardra, Nakshatra, and also Mercury, Gemini. So the moon shows when the homeland was attacked. That was the War of 1812, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and January 6th insurrection. All 4 of these major attacks on the homeland happened with major moon influence. And again, the moon is in the 4th house of the homeland. So again, and it was activated when the Civil War started via Rahu and Shatabishak Nakshatra. So again, Moon is in the fourth house. She rules Rahu, Mercury, and Cancer. So Rahu, Mercury getting activated a lot as being ruled by the Moon and also Saturn. So again, I encourage people to look at that and download the full article as you like. And I can stop there and get some questions if people have them. I don't know how long I even went. I just kept talking. So sorry if I went over. I tried to get as much out as I can and not go too long.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. Any questions? Please raise your hand. And kindly come on camera when you're asking the question.
I think I quieted them.
Hari Om. Hi, it was a great presentation, Geppi.
Thank you.
Right. My question here was, do you have a comparative study? I mean, is it like, have you put in the dates for considering both the charts?
Well, look, let me just be clear. First of all, no, I didn't compare both. But look, anyone can find. Look, this is the truth. And by the way, Sunil John talked about it last week. Is that sometimes we have charts, we don't even have the right time, and we give the right reading. Look, I have no doubt that this is why I said at the beginning, the people that are using the Sagittarius chart, I'm sure they take the same events and they explain them through the way they see them. And it makes sense to them. There was no reason for me to do it, and no, I didn't do it. I have looked. No, actually, that's not true. I did look at all of the events based on the rulerships, and again, I kind of just explained it without having to go through every single one. It would just be redundant, because what you see, even when I explained it, and if you go and look at the case study, you'll see that it's all of this eighth house energy when you have war. You'll see especially the rulerships and the way that the karmas ripen it doesn't just make a lot more sense. It makes perfect sense in the way I work. But you also have to understand something. When you're looking at an astrologer, you're looking at the way they work. You're looking at how I work and how I do it. And that's what I'm showing you. So I'm showing you how I do it. And no, the other chart doesn't work based on the way I do it. It wouldn't make sense for me. So it makes sense for the people using it. So that's their thing. And that's literally what you're looking at when you're looking at an astrologer's case studies and their work. So I have no doubt they could come on and say, well, I think this. And if I judge their methods by mine, they wouldn't work. So that's the best way to answer that question. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I get that.
Sir, you have taken, good morning. You have taken the chart of the independence time, no?
Of what?
You have taken the timing for the independence of America, no?
Yeah.
Then why there is an ambiguity between Sagittarius and Scorpio?
Because Satyanarayan, the time was not correctly recorded.
I don't know what your question is. I just explained that the whole time, I thought.
The time was not correctly recorded, hence Satyanarayan ji, hence there have been a lot of astrologers who have been using various times.
Okay.
Yeah. You know?
Okay, so again, I think the time was correctly recorded. I mean, that's the purpose of this. An astrologer of the day, the first part of the presentation was there was an astrologer there, a Freemason astrologer named Ebenezer Sibley, who was a professional astrologer, just like you going somewhere and seeing when something happened, you as an astrologer or me as an astrologer. He went there and recorded the time and published it, and it's never been contradicted. So again, it's very authoritative. To say there's no charter, it was confusing, is just really not, it's not really factual. There was an astrologer there and he recorded it. And again, there's nothing to contradict it. Again, if people want to move it around, but there has been a time that was recorded. And so again, if people want to literally go in and dispute it and say, well, I think this was wrong. Again, I've never seen any evidence to actually dispute what he said. because I don't see any contradicting evidence. Everyone extemporaneously who was there, Jefferson, Adams, all these people, and in retrospect, affirmed that that's when it happened. So they all said that's when it was signed. So it was like right when he recorded the time. So I took the time that he recorded, which would have been Scorpio from about 5 o'clock to about, what was it? 5-4, I don't remember what it was. No, like 4:30 to about 5:48 or something. So he had 5:10, but that was Dhanisha Nakshatra. So I just bumped it a little bit, and then the first dasha sequence. So that's what I explained. So again, I just want to be clear. Like I said, unless there's good reason to doubt it, again, it doesn't mean we take it on faith, but you look at this first as a very credible source. It's an astrologer. It's a chart it's a chart in hand of the astrologer. It doesn't get much more authoritative than that for this kind of a chart. And we have to not think, oh, but it was so long ago they didn't know what they were doing. To be honest with you, many of them knew more what they were doing then than people do now, because it was a serious profession and they studied it seriously. It wasn't like now so many astrologers take a few classes and then they're like, oh yeah, I'm an astrologer. That's not what it was back then. Especially in England, it was a very serious profession. So, of course, we don't take it on faith, but we also shouldn't just think, well, who knows? There's this, and then there's anything else we can make up. It's a little bit. That's kind of not so good. It's like any other birth time. Someone is born, and there's an astrologer taking the time, and then you're like, well, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's this. All right, but that doesn't make much sense. So that's my view on it, at least. So.
Thank you.
You're certainly
Sean has a question.
Good day, morning. How are you?
Hi.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure.
And it's really nice that we are organizing all this. Mr. Sunil and the Saptarishi team are doing a great job. Well, I had a question. You had a little bit of a touch of politics in explaining the chart of the USA and Donald Trump's chart. Well, I have this attraction to politics a bit. So I wanted to, if we have time, I wanted to ask a question and try to understand the reign of Donald Trump. What is your explanation about his chart and how he ruled the USA? And how do you explain the things that are happening in the world in the reign of Joe Biden?
Jean, that's a big question. I mean, another 1.5 to 2 hours will go.
Not only that, I ain't touching out with a 10-foot pole. I can hardly say Donald Trump's name without triggering 25% of American citizens, even if I say nothing. No, I'm not getting into it. Sorry, but okay. I use this chart simply because he's a transcendent figure that came in the context that I use. So try to keep it at that right now, because I think it's very compelling that right at the start, like I just said, of the Rahu Dasha just reset for America, and who comes on the scene? Look at his chart. Again, I want to be clear. Those of you who, I do astrology all the time, you never see exact conjunctions like this. It's crazy. I mean, and again, right on that Scorpio ascendant, his K2 is about like past karma and his like eclipsing, what's going on, like drawing all the attention, right? And I say eclipsing because when an eclipse comes, it like blocks out the power. So he's taken like the power. So again, that's all you have to look at, okay? And I'm not going to make judgments about what he's going to do. I'm just not going to do that.
Okay, last question. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
So, last question from Asha Patel ji.
Yeah, hi, Sam. Amazing analysis. Totally agree. USA has very Scorpio karmic messed up energy. I myself have experienced every time I have visited the place. I think it's a Shirshodaya sign rises from the head. So they appear to the world as leaders. So the world follows them. Mars in Jyeshtha Nakshatra, again, big brother of the world. Second house Sagittarius, so they are good in talking wisdom. They appear as very, brave country. And another observation is Satabhisha Nakshatra, as you said, it's a eunuch nakshatra. They're the one who accepted gay marriages or LGBT marriages. And even the 8th house energy, the country is always on war. Amazing observation, Sam. I just loved it. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. I have to just say one more thing that I didn't even mention, which I should have mentioned. If there's one issue that really shows it more than any other one, is guns. No other sane country in the world. We are awash in guns. I mean, I live here, and gun violence. I mean, what is guns? Is guns Mars, Scorpio, or Sagittarius? I mean, come on. I mean, no other country would do the insanity that we have with guns. Gun laws. You can't pass a gun law. We have massacres, kids massacred in elementary school, and politicians still will not pass gun laws because of gun lobby and money and corporate. Again, this is a deeply corrupt and dark system in this context of the moneyed interest. I didn't get into it so much because I don't want it to be that dark. But again, it's Scorpio, Saturn ascendant, Saturn aspecting all those planets in the 8th house. This is a very, very different energy than Sagittarius and Saturn aspecting planets in the 7th. It's completely different when you understand the difference between the 7th and 8th house and a Saturn aspect on Scorpio. You see this because everything by the way, the last thing underneath it all, everything revolves around the almighty dollar. And notice that as well. Everything revolves around the almighty dollar in politics and everything else in America, unfortunately. And dominating through money and things like that. So it's to me, it's very clear.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Oh, you're certainly welcome. And thank you all as well.
Thank you so much.
And John, I'm sorry I didn't want to get into those politics, but it's
I understand.
Too much. It's way too much. Plus, it's way too triggering.
I know. I've been following the U.S. politics, how astrologers get divided, whether it is Trump or this or that. And that's a huge war happening many a times.
I say things even just factual. Like you can't, like the things I said here were just factual. Even just saying factual things like there was an insurrection and there were court cases and he lost and even just saying facts. And it's just like, and it's just the wrath of God comes down. Anyway. I really appreciate you inviting me, John.
Most welcome. Quickly, just of course you must be aware, but for the audience, quickly, Gayatri Devi Vasudev takes Sagittarius Lagna, okay, and K.N. Rao takes absolutely the opposite. If I remember well, it's Gemini Lagna he takes for this thing. So there is always a difference of opinion. And one good way I would like to request the young ones in the jyotish community is, we will eventually find, like for example, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, his horoscope, Libra Lagna or Scorpio Lagna. This has been a fight, traditional fight among people. Okay, finally I've quoted how he has called one astrologer, shown her the birth chart, and obviously the same time was given to one of my Guru brothers. Okay, so anyway, this fight will always happen. As an astrologer, my request is to all young ones, as much time as you can spend in studying a country's chart, your own studies are improving. So, for example, Satabhisha or Dhanishta, more deeper you go, you'll get more better. And it's not about our predictions coming through, it's our studies in. That's more important. Anyway, Sam, wonderful to have you. Really an honor and a pleasure. And
thank you. Thank you. And just one last thing as well. I just want to reiterate that because, again, it was asked about, did I do a case study or what do I think of people that do other things? Again, I want to be respectful and honest and just say, I would love to see their case studies. Again, it's not saying that they're wrong, but their methods don't work for how I work. That's why when you're looking at an astrologer who does a lot of work, you're seeing how they do it. So see if it makes sense. Because if the way they work makes sense to you, then maybe that's an astrologer that you can study with and learn from. But it certainly doesn't mean that other astrologers, all the ones that the ones I mentioned, that everything they're saying is wrong, because they make accurate predictions as well. But this is what I think, obviously, how we should do it. And so you're seeing into how I work. So that's all it is. And all due respect to all of my colleagues, mentioned and unmentioned. So thank you again.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you, sir.